Welcome to my channel, The Binge Eating Therapist. I'm Sarah, former binge eater turned psychotherapist, and my mission is to use this space to bring content to you that will help you understand your struggle with food and break free from binge eating. And today's video is a personal one where I talk about my recovery. And I think I get a lot of questions from people saying, what do I need to do in order to recover? And I think that's quite seductive to think that there's something we can do and then recovery will come. But I think, and certainly for me, I got to recovery through the things that I learned. So I think with something like binge eating, I often think that recovery is kind of, first of all, it's outside in, which is going to be anything outside of you that interrupts whatever the cycle is. If we were left just with our binge eating in a vacuum, I don't know how many of us would be able to get ourselves out. So by outside in, I mean any kind of resources or knowledge or posts that you might read or ideas that you hear from somewhere else. That's something outside which interrupts or challenges what you're going through. But then the second part is the inside out. So I think it's why, have you ever had that experience where you've read a self-help book that you thought was the best book ever and it made so much sense and you thought, right, my life is going to change from this moment on? I think that's the danger of assuming that there's something outside of you that's going to tell you what to do. I think there are ideas outside which we can take, but we need to then experience what those ideas mean for us in our lives in order for it to change anything. So I hope that makes sense. I've pulled together my 5 lessons that I learned that I think enabled me to get out of binge eating. Because people will say to me, what was the turning point? And there wasn't a turning point. There was lots of little turns which kind of led me there. So these are some of the turns. So the first one, and I kind of want to be careful in how I talk about this because I think some people love it and some people hate it, but is the idea of the law of attraction. So early on, in the first couple of years maybe, someone recommended the book The Secret to me. And if you don't know what law of attraction is, it's basically that like attracts like. So what you think about, you create. Now, for me, when I look at The Secret now, it's way too magical thinking for me. Maybe it resonates and feels true to you, but for me, I'm not really a fan of it now. However, it did change my life. So there's something in it. And I think the way that I think about it is, so the real hardcore law of attraction people will be you could think about, you could think that you want a blue car and then you'll get a blue car. And one of the examples, I think in one of her books, Rhonda Byrne, I can't remember, who wrote the book, talks about wanting this skirt and then seeing it in a shop, and it was this really rare skirt. And that to me, I'm kind of that's not my experience of life. But what I did find with the law of attraction is that what I thought about and where I put my focus seemed to change my experience. As simple as that. So I don't necessarily buy into the idea that our thoughts can affect physical matter outside of us, but our thoughts can affect the physical matter inside of us, and it can affect what we notice. So it's the idea, if you think of the colour red and then look around, all the red stuff's going to jump out at you. Have you made the red stuff appear? I don't know, some hardcore metaphysical people might say that you did, but I would say that it's always been there and that we notice it. So what we put our focus on, we can create and bring more of. And it works with people as well. I've had an example of someone I've not had the easiest relationship with, and when I've changed the way that I look at them and started appreciating them more, I swear they've been a different person ever since. So there is something in this, in the interactions. I think it works really well in relationships, but it could also work quite well when it comes to food and when it comes to imagining how you want to be with food. So that idea that what you resist persists. So if the law of attraction, which apparently is always working, is a thing, then the very fact that you are so focused on the problem of binge eating will be part of what makes it bigger and bigger. So it's about shifting your focus somewhere else. in order to create feeling better. So after The Secret, I started using gratitude practices, and that really made a massive difference because I started to notice that there were good things in my life even when everything felt terrible, and that started to bring in more good things into my life, but maybe I was just noticing them. So I think this is one that you can kind of take and adapt any way that you choose, or it just may not resonate with you. I talk about this now in terms of intention. So I always go on about, setting an intention, or like, where do you need to put your focus tomorrow or now, really, if you've just binged? Do you want to be putting your focus on restriction? Probably not. You're setting yourself up for binging again. So it's a lot to do with this idea that we have some control and influence about where we put our attention, and then where we put our attention is what will determine our experience. And then when it came to making friends with my body, I think something that really helped was I came to the idea, and I don't know how I came to this idea, I think just because I was so miserable. I think first of all I noticed that the way I felt about my body wasn't static. So some days I felt a bit better, and some days I might feel terrible, which kind of then showed me that it wasn't my body that was the problem, but it was the way I was feeling about my body. So I made a decision that the way I felt about my body was the most important thing. People want to change their body because they think if they change their body, they'll change how they feel about their body. It does happen sometimes, but a lot of the time, if you've been at war with your body and you try and change it, it's really hard then to feel comfortable and peaceful. It's something that you had to go to war with just to try and make it look a certain way. So this was, I suppose, like another kind of intention, really. I decided that I wanted to feel comfortable in my body, and I was going to stop blaming my body for not making me feel comfortable, when actually it was the way I was thinking and feeling about my body that felt so uncomfortable. So that was a big one for me. And also, I'm just somebody who tends to be led by how they feel more anyway. So I'm a big believer in sort of gut feelings and intuition, and that's not for everyone. Other people are much more cognitively driven. And I used to be frustrated that I wasn't more cognitively driven, because I thought if I was less emotionally driven, then I would be able to have more self-control. But maybe that's just not how I'm wired. But also now I quite like the part of me that goes with what feels right. I accept that this is just how I view the world. It's how I interpret the world, through my feelings, more than through, cognitive, rational scrutiny. And then the third lesson that I learned was about restriction. And it took me a while to learn this lesson because I thought, I'm not being restrictive. So it doesn't make any sense that restriction would be playing a role in my binge eating, because I'm not restricting myself. If anything, I'm still eating too much. But it was when I realised how restrictive thinking can be so triggering, certainly for me and for a lot of people that I've met. So just that idea of telling myself that tomorrow I must be strict, tomorrow I must fast, tomorrow I must do this, tomorrow I must do that, that led me to, when tomorrow came, like wanting to binge even more. And the irony kind of being that if I'd binged the night before, and when I got to the point where I wasn't going to restrict anymore, I would set an intention to just really listen to my body and to try and focus on honouring my hunger and feeling satisfied and all of that. When I did that, I tended to eat much lighter the next day anyway. But I wasn't eating lighter because I thought I should or because I must. Because the minute I told myself that, I wanted to eat more. Again, I think just because I'm more emotionally driven, it doesn't make rational sense. But for me, I have to know that I can have something in order for me to say no. Because it needs to feel like a choice. That part of me that wants to be free, whether it's rebellion, whatever it is, it's there. So for me, and that's where the permission part of intuitive eating was really helpful for me. Because actually by giving myself full permission, I could finally say no. That was just what I learned. That was my experience when I put it into practice. And so then the fourth lesson, let's talk about intuitive eating. So I came across the intuitive eating book years ago, before Instagram existed. So many people think intuitive eating is quite a new thing, but I think the book was published about 25 years ago, something like that. So I found it quite early on. And I read this book and I thought, that makes so much sense. Yes, here is my answer. I've found it. I'm going to be an intuitive eater and I never have to binge again. And so after reading the book, I felt very inspired. Again, it was that idea I mentioned before about reading a self-help book and then thinking everything's fixed now that I have this knowledge. And so after I read the book, it actually broke a cycle of binging. I'd been binging for a while and I had a couple of weeks where I didn't binge because I was putting into practice intuitive eating. And then at some point I binged. Well, that just triggered off the all or nothing thinking. And I just thought, this intuitive eating thing, sure, it sounds great in practice, but it's not for me. I can't be an intuitive eater. I'm too broken, all of that. And there was no one else I knew at the time who was talking about intuitive eating. It wasn't on social media. One of the lovely things I think now is that if you're trying to do the intuitive eating thing, you've got lots of people on social media talking about it, offering tips, all of that, which would really, I think I would have found that so helpful at the time. So the intuitive eating book got shoved aside and I didn't go back to it for another 6 years or so. But I found my way back. But yeah, it made sense, but I just didn't know how to implement it. And I was so fixed on this idea of some kind of perfect recovery that I didn't give it the time or attention that it needs. And then my final lesson, which is one that I am still learning over and over again. And every time I relearn it, I'm like, of course, this makes so much sense. It's very simple. And it's that life is happening now. And that means the only time you have control of your behavior or what you're thinking is now. People try to, they try to take responsibility for things they've already done, food they've already eaten, but everything you've eaten up to this point now is beyond your control. So to take responsibility for it is not helpful for a lot of people because it turns it into shame. And that doesn't mean you don't learn from it. And it doesn't even mean that you don't sometimes feel regret. But that idea that, the beating yourself up, you should have done it differently, you should have done this, you shouldn't have done that, that's the bit that's corrosive, unhelpful, and will keep you stuck. And likewise, that idea of you've just binged, you're feeling terrible, so you start planning how tomorrow is going to be different. So instead of being in the moment, you lose yourself in these pleasant fantasies of what tomorrow is going to be like when you finally get a grip on this. It's also that idea that what makes us keep telling ourselves that we can do tomorrow what we're struggling to do today. Life is only happening now. So when people think how am I supposed to, with body acceptance or trying to let go of weight loss, people think, well, how am I going to let go of weight loss? You've only got to let go of losing weight right now. And then if it comes back, when you notice it's come back, and you let go of it again right now. So this kind of ties in with Eckhart Tolle stuff around the power of now. I found his material really helpful in learning these lessons. But people want to make a long-term plan. They want to know where they're going to be next month, next year, or even tomorrow. And you don't know how you're going to feel tomorrow. So that idea that when life's only happening now, I think sometimes it can feel well then, what if now's boring? What if now is just not how I want things to be? But when we make peace with this is just how things are, when we make peace with in this moment, this is how my body looks and feels, I just think for me, that is so freeing. Because I finally feel like I have a choice when I've accepted how things are, because I'm not wasting energy getting into a conflict with things that are beyond my control. That's draining and has such a negative impact on what I'm doing. So those were kind of, I think, 5 of the big lessons that I had to learn in order to stop binge eating. And if you've had some other lessons that you've learned, I'd love to hear about it. Stick it in the comments below. And likewise, if you are finding these videos helpful, if you can like and subscribe, that just helps me grow the channel. But, you know, you do you. I've also just thought of something else, like another lesson that I just want to tag on the end. And it kind of ties in perhaps a bit with what I've said. But it's that idea of, like, don't believe everything you think. Like, we think that when we're having a thought, we're just noticing something that's true, and that's just not the case. Our reality is shaped by our thoughts, because our thoughts create our experience of reality. So for me, thought work really, really helped. That idea of not arguing with my thoughts, but questioning them and exploring them and being curious, not judging them, but trying to look at other perspectives. And if you're a bit stuck with how to do this, I've mentioned before on previous posts and videos, Byron Katie is the go-to person on this. Check out her stuff. She's got like worksheets on her website that you can work through to let go of beliefs that perhaps are not serving you. So on that note, I'm going to sign off, and I'll see you on the next video.